Goodbye, dear Granny. The Queen's grandchildren keep silent vigil at her lying-in state. The Prince of Wales and his brother, the Duke of Sussex, stood at either end of her coffin at Westminster Hall.
It's amazing all there. I hope the queue goes past.
Earlier on, Prince William joined his father to thank some of the thousands of people who've been waiting for hours to pay their respects.
Just as we got here, some police said, just come and stand here, it's worth it. And we had no idea who was going to come along. Thanks, I'm going to cry.
Also tonight, Air Force One has just touched down in the UK. President Biden is among the world leaders attending the Queen's funeral. And by royal warrant, the glove, hat and handbag makers who styled Her Majesty.
She's worn some extraordinary pieces, really fashion forward, and you know, she's looked fabulous over the years.
This is ITV News with Geraint Vincent.
Good evening. The Queen's grandchildren tonight paid their own personal tribute to their grandmother. For 12 minutes, all 8 of them stood in silence around Her Majesty's coffin. They were led into Westminster Hall by the Prince of Wales and Prince Harry, who was for once given permission to wear his military uniform. Earlier, Prince William accompanied the King on a visit to the queue to thank those who've been waiting for many hours to pay their respects as the Queen lies in state. Here's our royal editor, Chris Shipp.
Just as it does every 20 minutes, the tap of the officer's stick signals a change of watch. But mounting vigil at 6 o'clock this evening, 8 of the Queen's grandchildren. Princesses Beatrice and Eugenie, Lady Louise and her brother James Viscount Severn, the oldest 2 Peter Phillips and Zara Tyndall, and Princes Harry and William. Once in place, the flow of the public resumed, and those who had come to pay respect to the Queen found themselves doing it alongside those who knew her as Granny. For this moment tonight, William and Harry were both in their military uniforms. Harry once again in the tunic of the Blues and Royals, a request, said the palace, from the King. For 12 minutes, they stood watch and remembered, grieving a personal loss on what was at that moment the most public of stages. A challenge at any age, but particularly for the youngest cousins, Louise at 18 and James just 14. So their parents, Edward and Sophie, the Earl and Countess of Wessex, came too and stood close by. Moments before, sisters Beatrice and Eugenie had released a statement. Along with a photo with their granny at Balmoral, they wrote, "There have been tears and laughter, silences and chatter, hugs and loneliness, and a collective loss for you, our beloved Queen and our beloved Granny. We, like many, thought you'd be here forever, and we all miss you terribly." Earlier, the King wanted to thank those working around the clock ahead of the state funeral on Monday and the many, many state visits from leaders around the world. He asked the police about their sleep deprivation and they about his. The individual whose job it is to officially escort the monarch on visits is the Lord Lieutenant. The one in London did it many times for the Queen. Today, he did it for the first time for the King.
Some people have been lucky enough to meet the Queen more than once, and only for a few minutes. I was lucky enough to meet her perhaps 50 or 60 times.
Today you had to do that job for the King for the first time. A lot of people are wondering just how on earth he's managing to cope with everything he's been through in the past 10 days.
I can't imagine how he does it. I really can't. Just looking at the itinerary, of where he's been, what he's done, whom he's spoken to, etc. It is remarkable. It is the job, and he is doing the job as he's meant to do.
And that job, at one point this afternoon, was all about everyone still doing this. So the new Prince of Wales joined the King to thank those who were queuing to see the late Queen.
Serious dedication for you.
Dedication, Prince William called it, for all those hours they'd put in.
William made my day go really, really happy.
And just minutes before they were due to pay their respects to the Queen, an unexpected chance to deliver good wishes to her son.
It was just really unexpected, and it's just the icing on the cake for what's happened in what's been a really emotional week.
This queue must end very soon. On Monday, the nation and this family will say a final goodbye. Chris Ship, ITV News.
And the long line of thousands of people waiting to pay tribute to the Queen as she lies in state shows no sign of getting any shorter tonight. 5 miles from Westminster, people from across the country and around the world are still arriving to join the queue. Young and old are braving another night in the cold in the hope that they'll be able to say a personal goodbye before time runs out. Emily Morgan has been speaking to some of them.
Cold, tired and damp. They spent the night on their feet, shuffling slowly forward on their lengthy pilgrimage.
Tired.
Tired and excited, aren't you?
No.
Just tired.
It's been great. Yeah, really good.
And nice weather.
Yes.
And occasionally he lets us borrow the chair.
If proof were needed, we are good at queuing. This is it. What we're perhaps not so good at is heeding advice.
So you flew over,
Yes.
even though people were advising not to come.
We just thought, as people have been saying, it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and even to be in the crowd. I can't believe I feel emotional.
I woke up all through the night to check the tracker, and it said, 25 hours and not to come. But I thought, I've come all this way, and for my mom, and I really wanted to be here.
The government had warned them not to travel, but this morning the wait dropped to 16 hours and there was no sign of a let-up.
There's been a steady stream of people here all morning in Southwark Park. The overriding sentiment is no matter what the wait, it is worth it. The weather is good, they want to say their goodbyes, so they still come.
I wanted to give the Queen some flowers and some love.
Whole families with children and babies braved the wait, even if some weren't quite sure how long it would be.
Have you been told how long it is?
Yeah, 4 hours.
It might be a bit more than that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you got snacks
Yeah.
and drinks?
Yeah.
Going to keep occupied?
Yeah.
How many hours do you expect to be queuing?
I've just told you.
15. 15.
If you have any extra blankets that we've given you last night, please go have them back.
Anyone would like a sweetie? Thank you.
5 miles away at the other end of the queue, 15 hours after joining, Rosalind and her daughter were now just metres away.
I think it's been worth it. It's really hard. I can't feel my legs, I can't feel my back. But looking at that building, I think it was all worth it.
Nearly there.
Yeah.
Just behind her, Paul Keeble and his son were moments away from thanking their former Colonel-in-Chief.
It's been quite upbeat up to now because we met quite a good group of people in the queue, and that's been amazing as well, meeting all sorts of different people along our journey. But I think once we get there, I think the emotional will probably come in a little bit. Yeah.
It is now.
Yeah.
Despite the grief and growing cold this evening, the collective will to stay and say goodbye prevails. Emily Morgan, ITV News.
Let's talk now to our reporter Ellie Pitt, who's at the start of the queue. Officials are warning of waits of at least 17 hours, Ellie. Any sign that's putting people off?
None at all, Geraint. The flow of people passing behind me to join the start of the queue here in Southwark Park is constant and doesn't look like it's slowing down anytime soon, despite the time and the temperature. Stewards here have been handing out blankets to people to help them on the start of this long, cold night ahead. I've seen people of all ages begin this long journey that they've got in front of them, and I've spoken to them, and they've said that despite the length of the queue and the temperatures expected overnight, this is still worth it, and they're determined to carry out their journey to see the Queen lying in state because they want to be able to pay their respects to Her Majesty in person and be witness to history. And they won't be able to for too much longer because the accessibility queue for those with disabilities is already permanently closed, and even those who are joining right now here in Southwark Park at the start of the queue actually won't be passing through Westminster Hall until around lunchtime tomorrow.
Ellie, many thanks. And as Ellie was saying, this afternoon the government announced that the accessible queue for people with limited mobility to access Westminster Hall would be permanently closed after all the timed wristbands available were given out. Organisers had faced criticism after many people were left waiting for hours with no information when it was earlier temporarily closed. They said that all wristbands allowing timed access had been allocated. Now, with military precision, the soldiers who will march alongside the Queen's coffin through the streets of Windsor carried out a full dress rehearsal this morning. Meanwhile, the Dean of Westminster Abbey, where the state funeral will take place, told Ben Chapman of the enormous sense of pride and responsibility he's feeling.
Before the sun had risen over Windsor Castle, the sound of pipes and of boots broke the silence of these otherwise deserted streets. A well-rehearsed procession being practised one last time before Monday, when, with millions watching, they will guide their Commander-in-Chief home. A matter of pride for those taking part as they return to their barracks at dawn.
I've been very lucky to have met the Queen a couple of times, and to be able to pay tribute to her, taking part in this parade, being so up close and personal as the hearse drives past, it's just a huge honour.
1,000 military personnel will take part in the Windsor procession alone, among 8,000 that have been mobilised in the last few days to accompany the Queen's final journey from Westminster Hall.
It's the largest ceremonial event on this scale that we have done for generations. And the thing to look out for is when those pipes, those 200 pipers strike up and the drones kick in, I defy you not to feel every single hair on the back of your neck going up at once.
Westminster Abbey was also being prepared this afternoon for the arrival of dozens of world leaders, among some 2,000 invited guests at the Queen's funeral, and with many millions more likely to be watching. Today, out of sight behind the great door of the Abbey, a full dress rehearsal has been taking place. The sound of the choristers practising occasionally leaks out from inside as this place prepares to stage the first state funeral for a monarch in more than 250 years.
Hello. Hello. How are you?
The Dean of Westminster will officiate at the service.
There's an enormous sense of privilege and there's an enormous sense of responsibility. And if I think about it for too long, there are moments when it's mildly terrifying.
What do you hope people will look back on this funeral service and remember?
This is a family funeral, so there is grief and there is sorrow, and a lot of people outside the family feel that too. This is a place where we will remember a long and happy reign, so there's actually an element of celebration about this.
The combination of pride and pressure not to put a foot out of place, will be with all those in the glare of history on Monday, a day few of us are likely to forget. Ben Chapman, ITV News.
And ahead of the state funeral in the last hour, Joe Biden has arrived in the UK. He is one of a number of world leaders who've come to pay their respects in person. Today, the King met prime ministers from many of the countries where he is now the head of state, as Shihab Khan reports.
He might be the most powerful person on the planet. And today, Joe Biden arrived in London, ready to pay his respects to Queen Elizabeth II. With the funeral days away, world leaders are gathering here in the United Kingdom to mark what will be one of the most significant moments in recent history.
Prime Minister of Canada.
Justin Trudeau arrived slightly earlier, meeting with King Charles, his head of state, and offering his personal tributes to the Queen.
As Prime Minister, I benefited from her counsel, her thoughtfulness, her curiosity, her sense of humour, and the engagement that showed a deep and abiding interest in and love for Canadians.
Others, including the Prime Minister of Australia, did the same, signing the condolence book, meeting the new king, and paying their respects. They weren't alone. Other leaders who also have King Charles as their head of state did the same today. The Prime Minister of Jamaica, the Bahamas, and New Zealand were all among those who met the new king. The world's eyes will be focused here on Monday as leaders and foreign dignitaries from all four corners of the globe descend to London for the state funeral. It is a unique and significant moment, and one that will shine the spotlight on the United Kingdom. For Liz Truss, a Prime Minister who's been in office for little over a week, it's an opportunity to meet her counterparts, albeit at a time of national mourning. She was supposed to sit down with the US President tomorrow, but that's been rearranged for next week when she flies out to the United States. She will instead be having informal meetings with other leaders as more foreign dignitaries fly in ready for Monday's funeral. Shihab Khan, ITV News.
Football fans across the country paid tribute to the Queen on the first Saturday of fixtures since her death. In the Premier League, Wolves and Manchester City fans took part in a minute's silence, followed by a rendition of God Save the King. Now, wherever she went in the world, the Queen always had her own distinctive style. It endured for 70 years, and among the hallmarks of her enduring image were the gloves and hats she wore and that ever-present handbag. Chloe Keedy has been to see some of the craftsmen and women who helped give the Queen a look that was all her own.
Her image will always be iconic. For 70 years, we watched and waited to see what the Queen would wear next.
You look back over the decades of and the hats that she's worn some extraordinary pieces, really fashion forward, and she's looked fabulous over the years.
Rachel Trevor Morgan has made more than 60 hats for the Queen. They've accompanied her all over the world, each one playing its own small part in history.
The hat that is sort of sticks out in my mind was when she went to meet George Bush in Washington. And it was a black and white lace hat, which I think was quite an unusual look for Her Majesty. You don't often see her in those monochrome colours.
And as well as a hat, there was always a handbag.
She says, I don't feel stressed unless I've got my handbag with me. And this is the Turandot, which is a bag. That one was I specially made for the Queen because she wanted one with a frame.
Lorna have been making handbags for the Queen since the 50s, with just a few royal adjustments.
Mostly longer handles, or in the last few years, only in the last few years, less weight, and we got to quite a lot of problem to take some of the inside out, which makes, we try and keep the look the same.
And then there were the gloves.
I think that the white gloves are an essential element in the Queen's iconic style.
Genevieve James, and before that her mother, have been making them for the Queen since the 1940s, and with them, a lifetime of memories.
It's a classic. It's basically the Queen and another Queen at London Fashion Week. It's when Anna Wintour and the Queen were both at London Fashion Week together about 3 or 4 years ago. And they're sitting side by side, and the Queen is looking wonderful, wearing gloves, and Anna Wintour is sitting next to her, wearing sunglasses. But it's iconic. You have the Queen, our Queen, next to the Queen of Fashion.
She was perhaps the most photographed woman in history. Her unwavering devotion to British brands, yet another example of her dedication to the nation she served.
Do you get a buzz when you see the Queen in a photograph or on television and she's got one of your bags on her?
Absolutely, I really do. I say, oh look, there she is with our bag.
She's the greatest hat wearer, really. So I feel so privileged to be making her hats. I can't think of somebody who's worn more, actually.
There will not be another Queen like this Queen, and I'm just happy that our gloves have played a small part in it.
Chloe Keedy reporting there. And finally, after what has been a poignant week in our history, a lighter moment between the King and one well-wisher in Cardiff has emerged. The monarch was handed a pen after that awkward moment in Northern Ireland earlier this week, where his pen leaked onto his hand and it was caught on camera. He graciously accepted the gift, triggering laughter and applause from the crowd. And that is it for tonight. The national weather is next. From everyone on the Weekend team, good night.